After getting their orders, everyone jumped into action. Before long, Lightning got the signal through the communication seal that Maggie had transported everyone to their positions. Since everything was set, grinning, Lightning gave a thumbs up and turned to her friends, Maisie and Hummingbird, waving to signal it was go time. Shortly after, the three girls sprinted over to a contraption that Lightning had named the East Wind, which had 4 missiles on each side. Hummingbird climbed into the harness and grabbed the control rods, channeling her magic and using her ability to make the whole setup lighter. Maisie then transformed and laid on top of the harness. Lightning secured them with straps and ropes, merging Maisie and the East Wind into one unit. Maisie gave it a few test runs, confirming it was just within her weight limit. Once everything was ready, Lightning clapped her hands, put on her goggles, and jumped into the air, laughing as she announced that all routes were clear for takeoff. Hummingbird, covering her forehead, muttered, "Here we go again." Maisie spread her massive wings, and they began to ascend. Soon enough, they reached the skies above the old holy city. Looking down at the hated city, Lightning thought, karma really did a number on this place, the church had it coming. But the three girls knew there were still many innocent civilians here, especially the orphans kidnapped by the church and locked in various monasteries. So, bombing the entire old holy city wasn't an option. With a sigh, Lightning ruffled her hair, clearing her mind before diving quickly. Maisie followed closely. They descended toward a plaza, and everything on the ground rapidly grew larger. Some knights noticed the descending shadows, but before they could react, Lightning sharply pulled up and shouted, "Now, drop the bombs." Hummingbird, in the harness, yanked the release lever. The bombs detached, instantly regaining their original weight and plummeting down. Then, Lightning and Maisie turned around and flew in the opposite direction. The knights below, initially shocked and thinking it was just a couple of stones, joked that it would be lucky to hit anyone. So, none of them bothered to take cover. In a split second, the 2 missiles hit dead center, exploding with a massive boom. Almost instantly the entire plaza was engulfed in flames and smoke. More knights rushed to the scene, only to witness what looked like hell itself. Before they could react, the girls swooped back for a second round, dropping 2 more missiles into the crowd, and causing another explosion. The deafening explosions and the agonized screams of the injured tormented everyone's nerves. A commander urgently ordered a retreat. The remaining troops quickly fled outside the city, unaware that the First Army had completely surrounded them from the sides. As soon as they emerged, a barrage of bullets was fired, and they fell to the ground. It only took a few hours for the entire Dawn Army inside and outside the Holy City to be annihilated. After the battlefield was cleared, the news quickly reached Edith. An officer handed her a report, which she read carefully. However, there was no mention of the King of Dawn and Pian. The officer explained that no bodies matching his description were found among the dead. During the interrogation of prisoners, some claimed to have seen someone resembling Pian, but in the chaos, they couldn't be certain. However, the prisoner mentioned that the person was dressed in civilian clothes and accompanied by a group of knights. When asked about the location, the officer replied it was within the Holy City during the bombing. Edith nodded, figuring it had to be Pian. In such a significant war, it made sense for the king to lead personally. Edith considered that the King of Dawn dropping his ego to disguise himself as a civilian and escape was a smart move. Hearing this, the officer clenched his fists in frustration, upset that the biggest target had escaped. He lamented not having a pursuit unit ready. Edith, however, told him not to beat himself up. She gave a cold smirk, suggesting this might not be a bad thing. Once they realized how terrible it was to be enemies with Grey Castle, and Pian's throne might not be so comfortable anymore. The officer then asked what the next step was, asking if they should occupy the Holy City right away. Edith told him to wait, mentioning that Maisie had gone to retrieve an important person. If all went well, they might take the city much easier. Meanwhile, Isabella and Agatha sat on Maisie's back as they descended into the First Army's camp stationed outside the Holy City. Seeing the familiar city again after a year, Isabella felt a wave of nostalgia. A guard informed them that Edith was waiting inside. Entering the tent, Edith introduced herself with a smile, explaining she was now a member of the Defense Department and the temporary commander for the operation against the Holy City. This was the first time Isabella and Edith met. Isabella's initial impression of Edith was that she was an exceptionally beautiful mortal lady. Edith handed her a report, mentioning that Lightning had inspected the 3 main monasteries and discovered a major problem. The orphans seemed organized and prepared to defend the compound to death. This explained why no action had been taken yet. Edith asked Isabella if she had any suggestions. Isabella pondered for a moment and decided to head over and talk to the orphans personally. Outside, upon seeing Isabella, Maggie immediately stood at attention and saluted, pressing her right hand to her chest and bowing. Isabella shook her head, reminding her for the dozenth time to drop the formalities and just use her name. They were no longer the pure ones. Despite this, Maggie still bowed and saluted, leaving Isabella with no choice but to sigh again. Maggie used her ability to summon her magic cube, and they all stepped inside. Maggie glanced back at the first army soldiers, asking if they weren't coming. Isabella replied that they wouldn't enter the holy city until it was safe. The magic cube quickly transported the group to one of the monasteries. The large courtyard was nearly empty, save for a few girls who looked like they hadn't eaten for days, holding oversized pitchforks as weapons. One girl sensed something and turned abruptly, shouting, "Who's there?" This startled the others nearby, causing a wave of panic. As everyone turned in that direction, they saw two women and seemed to believe the two had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Sharp whistles echoed through the compound as all the girls rushed out, each holding different weapons. Agatha began to channel her magic when the eldest girl suddenly shouted for everyone to stop. Trembling, she asked if the woman before them was Lady Isabella, the former pure one of the Pope. Isabella nodded calmly. It seemed like they hadn't forgotten her. Seeing the girls drop their weapons, Isabella felt reassured that the task given by the king might be accomplished smoothly. But in the next moment, she was taken aback by their reaction. The girls simultaneously fell to their knees, heads bowed, crying out that they were saved, that Lady Isabella, or rather, Pope Isabella, had come to rescue them, and pleaded, "Your Grace, don't abandon us." Isabella felt a surge of anxiety after being called the Pope and was about to deny the girls' pleas, but Agatha placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Agatha reminded her that the mission was paramount and that His Majesty wouldn't mind this ruse. Taking a deep breath, Isabella sternly asked the girls what they meant by saving them and inquired about the whereabouts of the judgment soldiers and priests. The girls explained that they had fled while some were summoned away by the church. Quickly, one girl began to confess, claiming she had committed a sin by killing a priest. The others hurried to defend her, insisting it wasn't her fault. Some mentioned that they had been without supplies for 2 months. They didn't have any clothes or food. Some even began questioning if they had been abandoned. A cacophony of voices erupted as everyone tried to explain their situation. Isabella shouted for silence, declaring that one person should speak at a time. She chose the eldest girl to explain. The girl revealed that since the battle at Coldwind Ridge, the monastery's supplies had dwindled. Initially, food portions were reduced, and eventually, even the number of meals was halved. With the storeroom nearly empty, they had no idea what was happening outside due to the information blackout. The church's people had deceived them, only telling them to constantly pray while the church withdrew all judgment soldiers and priests. Once the news reached them, only a few unselected or rather abandoned believers remained at the monastery. From these people, they learned that the Grand Cathedral in Hermes had collapsed, and the church was on the brink of survival. In a desperate bid, the higher-ups decided to abandon the old holy city and recall all essential personnel to the highlands. The final order left for the monastery was to defend against the invading enemy and sacrifice their lives to the god until the end. Faced with this dire news, the situation only worsened. The abandoned believers became more tyrannical, even abusing the girls. They declared themselves the new priests and started committing atrocious acts. It didn't take very long until the situation had completely gotten out of hand. Hearing their companions' cries for help, the girls decided to fight back, arming themselves and launching an attack during the night. After killing the priests, they learned that the Dawn Army had advanced to the city's borders. In desperation, they took up arms, leading to what's happening now. After hearing the girl's statement, Isabella felt something was off. There was a secret passage leading to the holy sanctuary, even the main exit. How could such an important location be abandoned so easily? This caused her to have many suspicions. She then asked the girl for her name, and she replied, "Autumn." Isabella pointed out that without food, they would die even if the Dawn Army hadn't come. She asked if they had ever considered escaping. The girls hesitated and then looked down. They had never left this place before, and even if they did, where could they go? Though hungry and underfed, they still received some food daily. They believed that leaving might not guarantee anything better. Seeing their confusion, Isabella understood what was going on. It wasn't just the church's orders that kept them here, their way of life left them with no other choice. Isabella then asked why they called her Your Grace and the Pope. Autumn hesitated and then explained that the current Pope Main had passed away, the 3 main bishops had all died, and Hermes hadn't issued any new decrees. According to the principle of automatic succession, Isabella was the closest to the throne. The girls then pleaded with her to save them. It was then that Isabella realized the girls saw her as their last hope. With this in mind, she devised a better plan. She told them she was there to deliver an important message. She began telling the girls that the church was no longer the church they knew. Raising her voice, Isabella declared, Maine was not the true pope. He betrayed Pope Oberlin and usurped the papal throne. In truth, Pope Oberlin intended to pass the position to zero. She further explained that Greycastle was not an enemy of the church. To resist the real enemy, Pope Oberlin even sought an alliance with Greycastle. She assured the girls they were now safe and that the church's orders they got were false. However, the first thing they needed to do was to restore order in the old holy city. Her words caused many to feel confusion and disbelief. But Isabella knew that shattering their old beliefs and weaving a half-true, half-false narrative was the only way to save these girls and enable King Roland to truly control this land. Suddenly, a girl's stomach growled. Embarrassed, she covered her belly. Isabella smiled and said, "Of course, let's take care of everything after everyone has had something to eat." The girls cheered, shouting, "Long live the Pope!" Soon, they opened the gate and kicked it down, and similar scenes played out in the other monasteries as well. The girls and orphans poured out, relieved and hopeful. A little girl stood before Isabella and respectfully said, "Thank you, Lady Isabella." One by one, each child expressed their gratitude, calling her a good person and promising never to forget her. Isabella was initially surprised. Since becoming a pure one, she had received plenty of hatred and curses, but this was the first time she heard words of thanks. Suddenly, she felt something new in her heart, a feeling she had never experienced before, and she really liked it. Maybe this was what Roland had intended all along. Blushing slightly, she continued with her work. Sometime later, Roland and Nightingale arrived in the Northern Territory. Nightingale asked about the situation in the Holy City. Roland, reading a confidential report, told her that the anticipated battle hadn't occurred. Neither the Takira witches nor their latest equipment had been needed. Nightingale was surprised. Had the church offered no resistance at all? The report indicated that the church's upper echelons had collectively vanished. The once bustling city was empty, with only a few residents left in the outer districts to maintain the illusion of the church's presence. But the intel didn't go into much detail. After a short break, Roland told the army to move on to Hermes. When they finally got there, Isabella, Edith, and a few others were waiting at the castle gates to greet them. Seeing the empty city, Roland was still having a hard time believing they had actually abandoned it. Was this some kind of trick? Were they planning to regroup and hit back later? He knew he had to stay sharp against these fanatics. Isabella, though, smiled and told Roland not to worry. The church wasn't coming back. They had even left behind a messenger. In the northern district, Roland met this so-called messenger. It was a frail old man in priest robes, clutching a book. The old man glanced at Isabella before turning to Roland and asking, "Are you His Majesty Roland Wimbledon, King of Greycastle?" After Roland nodded, the old man spoke slowly, "You've won, Your Majesty." His tone was dripping with sarcasm. He told Roland that if this was the outcome he wanted, the church would back off and leave him everything he needed. The city was his, but in return, he'd inherit their nightmares. Roland, unfazed, asked what these nightmares were. The old man got louder, practically spitting as he talked, saying Roland had no idea what kind of enemy they'd been preparing to face for centuries. By destroying the church, Roland would bear the consequences. He even claimed humanity would face extinction because of him. Finally understanding the old man's implication, Roland calmly said the old man was exaggerating. Seeing Roland's indifferent attitude, the old man slapped his book, saying that if Roland read the church's sacred texts, he would understand the foolishness of his actions. He was about to reveal the true enemy of humanity when Roland interrupted him, knocking the book from his hand and coldly stating, "The demons, right?" Roland's mocking tone silenced the old man. He continued, saying the old man would probably mention the divine war or the smile of the gods or maybe the chosen one. Roland, squinting, told him he had already dealt with the demons. The old man was stunned, his mouth wide open, but he was unable to form a coherent response. He turned to Isabella, who simply shrugged, then tells the old man that she hadn't said anything, but Roland had known about these things for a long time and knew more than anyone from the church. Afterward, Roland ordered the soldiers to take him away, fearing that any more words might cause the old man to die from anger on the spot or maybe even have a heart attack. The soldiers lifted him and escorted him away. Turning to Isabella, Roland praised her efforts, acknowledging that without her, the holy city wouldn't have returned to order so quickly. Isabella had worried that Roland might disapprove of her issuing orders under the guise of the Pope to unify the abandoned. Roland, however, reassured her with a smile, saying he didn't mind as long as it was effective. He added, even so, the necessary redemptions must still be served. Isabella hurriedly said she had never expected otherwise. Roland smiled and mentioned that, being said, there would also be rewards. He told Isabella that if she ever needed to act in an official capacity as his envoy, she could enjoy the privileges that came with that status for the day. However, she looked puzzled. Roland explained she could enjoy a spacious luxury suite, gourmet meals prepared by royal chefs, and as much chaos drink as she could handle. Of course, he also gave her the option to opt for gold coins as a reward. Isabella was surprised but eventually lowered her head, blushing and saying she would follow Roland's wishes. As they arrived at a warehouse in the Holy City, soldiers discovered a stockpile of food and weapons. Roland received the news and rushed over. To his surprise, besides gold and jewels, none of the strategic materials had been taken. It seemed the old priest's claim of leaving everything intact was true. In the basement of this warehouse, they found a stash of berserk pills, exactly 420,000 of them. Roland immediately ordered them destroyed. A large fire was lit on the city walls, burning the pills to ashes, with the remaining residue pushed off the walls. Roland sighed in relief. Next, they would wait for Axe to clear the eastern territories, gather the army at the neighboring country's border, and launch a pincer attack on the Kingdom of Dawn alongside the main force. Admiring the scenery outside, Roland remarked on the rare moment of leisure. He returned to his tent, eager to visit the place Isabella had mentioned before, the Hall of Reflections. It was said that Acris used illusions there to pass down history across centuries. It was also where Zero transitioned from a pure one to the Pope. He shared his plan with Nightingale and Anna when the door suddenly burst open. Lightning, pouting and looking utterly aggrieved, couldn't believe Roland had forgotten her for such an important adventure. Coo, coo. Maisie also chimed in with a couple of cries. Before Roland could say anything, the two girls threw themselves onto him. Well, there was no way to refuse now. With the first one, others naturally followed. Hummingbird, Lily, Agatha, and even Nanawa joined. Nanawa insisted that if Sister Anna was going, she had to go too. Lily seriously stated that she needed to go in case there were any bacteria or viruses inside. Phyllis also begged to come along, pleading that she wished to see Acris at least once. In the end, everyone piled onto Roland. Oh, a quick correction, Maisie was actually on his head. Upon reaching the long secret passage, the group smoothly arrived at the main gate. Under Isabella's guidance, they soon stood before a grand hall. Pushing open the doors, they were greeted by portraits of past popes lining the walls, with Acris' portrait prominently displayed in the center. Roland walked into the hall, looking around until his eyes met Acris. She was incredibly beautiful and very powerful. Anna, standing beside him, commented on how pretty she was, thankful she was no longer around, otherwise. Hearing this, Roland gently ruffled Anna's hair and asked what she was thinking. Inwardly, he mused that even if Acris were alive, he wouldn't easily give in. But with Nightingale around, he decided to keep his thoughts to himself. Well, it seems like our boy isn't very confident in himself. Anyway, the group proceeded to the illusion chamber behind the portraits. Isabella explained that there were 9 magic stone imprints, each recording a significant historical event. If Roland wanted, she could activate each one. Roland nodded in agreement. Isabella used her magic, and suddenly, everyone seemed to vanish, though suddenly Roland felt someone was grabbing him. Nightingale, alarmed, asked what was happening. Isabella clarified that the illusions created by these imprints directly affected their vision, making it seem like they had disappeared, but in reality, they were still in the same spot. Both Anna and Nightingale held onto Roland's hands tightly. Soon, images appeared before them, showing witches from the Federation in intense debates. As the final illusion began playing, Agatha curiously asked who these people were. Phyllis speculated that they might be the early founders of the Federation. Roland, intrigued, asked for more details. Phyllis explained that after the First Divine War, the surviving transcendent witches established the precursor to the Federation. She suddenly realized what she was seeing and exclaimed that this was the legendary Oath of the Three Queens. Agatha and Phyllis were excited, but Roland was unfamiliar with it. Agatha explained that it was a pivotal moment when the Federation transitioned from a loose organization to a unified one. After the First Divine War, the Federation, controlled only by witches, was formed, but internal debates on governance and strategies against the demons persisted for years. Eventually, 3 powerful factions emerged, dominating other lords and city-states, and established a tricouncil decision-making structure, leading to the formation of 3 major cities. The 3 leaders were titled queens and formed what was known as the Federation's top 3 seats. Roland quickly grasped this history, but his expression soon changed, which Anna immediately noticed. The group looked up and saw a portrait of a person none of them recognized, except Roland. He explained that the person in the portrait, with an eye patch and seated cross-legged on a high-backed chair, looked exactly like Lon, Garcia's mentor from the dream world. Meanwhile, in the forest with Lorca. In the forest, Lorca sniffed the air and soon found a mixed-breed demonic beast, a bear-like hybrid in the midst of its meal. Just as Lorca was about to transform, she heard footsteps. The hybrid also heard the sound, raising its head to see 2 demons approaching. The hybrid beast let out a raspy growl in the direction of the footsteps, eyeing the demons and their sharp bone spears. The demons looked exactly as Lightning had described. The hybrid beast attacked first, but the demons remained calm. One demon's arm swelled rapidly, meeting the beast's massive paw with a resounding thud. The two monsters collided, pushing against each other. Meanwhile, the other demon raised its spear. Lorca remembered Lightning's warning: if she encountered enemies, she should retreat and report back to Roland. Should she stay or go? Her mind began rendering like a Windows XP system. Rationally, she knew she should retreat, but the urge to fight boiled within her. Then, she made up her mind. Just as the demon threw its bone spear, Lorca leaped from her hiding spot, aiming for the demon grappling with the bear-like hybrid. As the spear pierced the hybrid's body, Lorca bit off the demon's arm. The demon staggered backward while the other blew a horn hanging from its neck, its deep sound shattering the forest's silence and startling birds into flight. Could there be more demons nearby? Either way, Lorca knew she had to deal with these two first. The remaining demon drew an axe and swung it at her. She dodged with a powerful kick onto the ground, landing behind the demon. As the demon turned its head, Lorca curled her large tail into a hook and whipped it at the demon's back, sending it flying into a tree. As she moved to press her advantage, trying to finish off the demon grabbed her paw. Instinctively, she felt danger from behind. The other demon had already drawn another bone spear, and its arm had fully regenerated, preparing for another strike. Wasn't it supposed to take more than half an hour to heal? Alarmed, Lorca knew she was in trouble. The spear was already flying toward her. She had to take a gamble. She reverted to her normal state, and her wolf form shrinks quickly. She barely dodged the spear, and the spear hit the other demon's head instead. After the second round, the demon's arm withered, and it uttered two sounds, ta and ka. Without missing a beat, she sprang up, transforming her hand into a wolf claw, and crushed its head. Finally, Lorca exhaled in relief. Suddenly, she heard a sound coming from one direction, so she quickly climbed onto a tree. Whatever she saw caused her to freeze on the spot. Beyond the forest, a mass of demons appeared. She saw some crawling on the ground, and others flying in the sky, and within, she spotted a few massive creatures beyond imagination, all moving step by step in her direction.